Well, hello, I'm Philip. I'm a front-end designer here at Sparkbox. And yes, we want to have copacetic collaboration and have our designers and developers working in harmony. So when it comes to our getting our, maybe I'm having control. There it goes. Okay. Having this collaboration, our critical question is, what are the criterion and how can designers and developers come together to enact their collective goal? So I'm going to go through some criteria that I have identified to help you and help us go forward. So first off is we want to encourage constant communication. And the thing is, we get into looking at all kinds of different tools and ways of doing things. And the thing is, the best tool is the one that's the most effective for you and your team. So the most important thing is to have effective communication. And effective communication is rooted in these relationships that we have between our teammates, between people. And it's not the tools and methods. What it requires is a regular dialogue between parties. We'll definitely be going into tools, and Jay's already gone through a number of different tools that we have used. But those tools help us, but it requires an active participation from everyone involved to do that. And sometimes you might need some help trying to encourage that kind of communication. So here's some ways to communicate in dialogue. One thing that we do quite a bit, and you can kind of see that already in what Jay shared, was written explanations of expected behavior and interaction. There's conversations going on through Figma, but we have other tools like Jira that we use for our conversations. There's demos and decomps. If you're not familiar with those, just from a decomps, I'll give a quick overview of those. But demos, just providing anything you can to demonstrate what it is that you want to do. Pairing with design and development, coming together. If you're able to be in the same room, maybe someday, many years from now, hopefully it's not that long, you're able to be at the same computer looking at the same screen. If not, maybe you're on a video call going through and working through that. Jay already kind of talked about using the browser dev tools. Keys and guidelines. These are some things that I'll show you here in a little bit, but they're ways that, if you're familiar with GitHub and GitHub's READMEs, we've been trying to incorporate into some of our Figma files to try and help communicate what the intent of the design is and what we're trying to do here. And then there's prototypes. You could do visual prototypes using Figma or Keynote, maybe even After Effects, whatever tool you know the best to help identify and show how something would work. If you know code, get into CodePen or maybe Webflow to build out a little bit of a demonstration of how something is going to work. So with that, here's an example of a written explanation. This is in a Jira card, and Andrew, who's going to be speaking next, was working with one of our developers, Catherine, and went through and described exactly how something needed to work with this mobile navigation, wrote out what is expected to happen when there is something that occurs. Specifically, he's describing the animation and includes a link to a prototype for what this animation needed to look like for our sparkbox.com redesign we did recently. Now, the keys and guide, that was something I mentioned earlier, but what we've done when we were working on the Sparkbox redesign is we went through and created an emoji-based key system to identify what the process was and what the stage was for each design. So we had approved and ready for development, so the developers could come in here and quickly identify on the left-hand side of Figma and the pages section what things were ready to start work on, and then able to see what was in progress, and then some things for the designers to be able to identify things that were in an archive state or that we needed to make sure that we didn't edit. Some of that was carried over from a client project that we did this on, because we want to make sure that we didn't edit anything that the client was going to be going and looking at. And then we also have in here some links and resources. And that's one nice thing about Figma is you can put a link directly in there. And so we have direct links out to documentation that we have, maybe with GitHub or wireframes that we have going through Axure. And then decomping. So this is from a project that we did with our apprentices last year, a design that I went through and did, and then to hand it off to them and explain what they needed to do, I went through and identified different areas that would be components that they would be needing to build out. And so I went through and highlighted these things. In pink, those are like these larger reusable pieces. In the green, I have some things that are in there of like, hey, these are the types of font styling and font sizes that I've been thinking about and would like for you to implement. And so this was a way of communicating. It didn't need to be necessarily completely verbal. It's information that they can use and put into place when it comes to developing things. So that's criteria 1. And making sure that we have good communication. Now, criteria 2, we want to ensure that we have confident conclusions. This is a big problem when it comes to designers and developers, because designers and developers both have different ways of thinking things and approaching things. And we need to make sure that we're leaving no room for assumptions on either side. So one of the biggest barriers to effective communication in collaboration is misunderstandings due to unmet, unstated, or even unknown expectations. We come at these things with things that we think that we know how something works, but how a developer thinks a button works may be very different from how a designer thinks a button works. And so we want to make sure that we are all on the same page every step of the way. So there are opportunities and ways to encourage a culture of understanding between your designers and developers. So one thing is action items and goals, making sure that you are creating a list that is attainable and visible to the whole team. This could be done in a number of different ways. It could be part of your Jira setup. Maybe you have a Slack channel that is posting what those things are, but making sure that it is clear and accessible to everyone on the team. You may even go to the extent of putting it in something like a Google Doc and make it so it's editable by the team. Repeat back expectations. I think this is a big one that I've been trying to work on a good bit, but the designers repeat back to the developers what they understand needs to be done and vice versa. So there's just a area that you can find any misunderstood spots in that communication. Another thing that I absolutely love, you probably have come across this if you're working agile, is retrospectives. I love retrospectives. They've been the biggest thing for me when it comes to figuring out what kind of communication breakdowns are we having throughout the course of the development and design process. And being able to look back either every week or every other week as to how things went and what things need to be improved. And the big thing is definitely keep in mind the idea that we all are just doing our best and how can we improve from where we're at. And, if you're continuing to have some breakdowns in communication between the designer and developer, it might help to get a third party involved. Sometimes that might be the project manager. That's usually as far as I've ever needed to go, to bring somebody in to just help bridge that gap in the miscommunication that might be going on. Maybe it's somebody else, another developer or designer that just is not a part of the project, and they're able to come at this with fresh eyes and help see the problem. So one thing I want to show you real quick is a retro that we did, and what this looks like. We're using, I think it's called Easy Retro. I think it used to be called Fun Retro, so I get confused there. But here we have 3 columns, and this is the prime directive of the retro that I just love. And I it's one of those things that I'm learning cross-stitch so that I can specifically cross-stitch this and hang it in my office. Regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. And here we just have 3 columns that say what went well, to improve, and action items, things that we can go forward with and make changes to our process and how we worked. It just has always been so good, and I love it. The next last criteria that I'm going to share with you is embracing creative curiosity. I think I forgot to hit the button. We want to experiment and iterate together. We want to make sure that we're going through and just doing what we can to learn and make new things. So the designer and the developer process and relationship should look more like a dance than a shopping list, right? If you've been like me and you've been in this field for a long time, it can be what we used to call them design grenades, where we would design something and lob it over and just expect the developers to do it. And that would cause a lot of tension. And really, it is much more of a dance. It should be a partnership, something that is being worked on together for us to have a common goal. So here are some ways, went too far, ways to spark creativity amongst your team and between your designers and developers. Experimentation, kind of mentioned this already, but just working through different ideas, both in design and code, and iterating on those ideas. Maybe the developers got some idea and they don't fully understand how to make it visually look, but they could sketch it out and maybe even create a little bit of a prototype. And the designer can take that and flesh that out. I love working with developers that have already put together a lot of code, and I can just come in here and start adding some design. I'm a bit of a coder myself. I love working with CSS, so I'll go in and just start adding styles and come up with a design really quick. Group improvisation. I've got this at the bottom here of Ben's article, but Ben Callahan, our president, wrote an article called Group Improvisation, and I think this really gets into allowing there to be latitude and freedom to just stretch and try different things together. We can come up with really awesome, fun things if we just are working together with an understanding that the developers have a great sense of understanding of even design, and they can go as far as they can, and then I can pick up and run with wherever they're at and go back and forth. And then huge, and we are so big at this at Sparkbox, is to share what you learn. Tomorrow morning at I think 10 o'clock, our whole team, all of Sparkbox, is getting together to see what everybody has been working on across all of our projects for the last 2 weeks. Get together your team, regardless of if it's your project team, if you're on a product company, bringing together all points of that, just to share what's been done and what's being worked on, both on the design and the development standpoint. And then also try and get feedback and answers to questions. I think that's a big thing that can be overlooked, is just looking out for feedback. And so if I've made a design and get the designers together and we're all looking at that, but maybe I need to pull in a developer to take a look. Does it make sense? Julie had mentioned the Kodak folks bringing in the administrators and the janitors and whatnot to do their user testing. There's a certain level of bringing in additional people to take a look at your designs just to get feedback. And I think that especially between designers and developers is very important. So that is what I have. Happy collaborating.
Hey, thanks again for checking out this video. If you want to learn more about how we're building a better web, visit us at sparkbox.com.